Good day, grade 11s, and welcome to our virtual tourism classroom. My name is Penny Vosloo. I'm a tourism teacher in the Nelson Mandela Bay district, and I am presenting today's lesson based on South African heritage bodies. Before I start, I'd like to acknowledge the huge role played by Erika Ferreira, who is the subject advisor for tourism in Nelson Mandela Bay District for Zone 1. Erika has compiled all of this magnificent information for you. And I'd also like to acknowledge the role played by the E-Teaching and Learning Directorate of the Eastern Cape Department of Education. Now, before we start with today's lesson, I'd just like you to take a look at the images on your screen. In the middle of your screen, you will see there is a lovely logo that you will find is repeated many times in this PowerPoint, and that is the logo of the South African Heritage Resources Agency. The Heritage Resources Agency, you studied that in grade 10 in term 3, so you should remember that. If you also have a look at the other images on your screen, you will see on the left hand side some beautifully brightly colored houses. Those are located in the Boerkaap in the Western Cape in Cape Town, and are very much a part of the heritage of the Western Cape. If you take a look at the right hand side, there you will see the grave of SAHRA Overview in the Eastern Cape, and that is just outside the town of Hankey. You will also note that the logo of SAHRA, the South African Heritage Resource Agency, is also evident on the monument that has been erected on that site. If we can then continue, I just want to take you to your curriculum and orientate you as to what we are going to be doing today and the various aspects of today's lesson. We are looking at South African heritage bodies. For a start, we're looking at the South African Heritage Resource Agency, SAHRA, and its logo and functions. Now, I have already indicated the logo to you. It will come up quite a few times again in this PowerPoint. We will also be taking a look at provincial heritage agencies. And finally, awareness of special heritage permits and protection regulations. For example, structures older than 60 years, archaeological and paleontological sites and materials, meteorites, ships, burial grounds, and graves. And then the final thing that we will be doing in today's lesson is taking a look at an activity that comes from an old exam paper. If we can first have a look at the concept of national estate, I'm going to read it out for you. Those resources of cultural significance that are of great national value and need to be preserved for the benefit of the community and for future generations. So items that are part of the national estate are resources of cultural significance. They are also of great value to the entire nation. They must be preserved, in other words, they must be looked after. Why must they be looked after? For the benefit of the community and for future generations. So if we then break down that definition of the term national estate, they are resources of cultural significance firstly. They are of great value to the entire country. They must be preserved, and they are for the benefit of the entire community and for future generations. Now, if I could perhaps just say one or two things here at this point in connection with heritage. In South Africa, we have many, many different cultural groupings, and each of these cultural groupings have items in their heritage that they perceive as being part of the heritage of that particular cultural grouping. So somebody from the Xhosa culture will perceive a specific thing as being part of his or her heritage of the Xhosa people, whereas a person who is Afrikaans will perceive something different to be as part of his or her heritage. An English-speaking person, the same. A Zulu person, the same. But at the end of the day, we have a collective heritage in South Africa. And that collective heritage is important for us as a nation. And all of those items form part of the national estate. I'd like to draw your attention to the left-hand side of your screen yet again. That is the logo of the South African Heritage Resources Agency. The abbreviation is given at the top, SAHRA. Take a look at the image in the middle of the logo. You will see there is an outline of South Africa, and below South Africa there are two hands which are protecting South Africa and holding their hands. The hands are holding it around South Africa. If you take a look at the right-hand side of your screen, you will see a little bit of information about the South African Heritage Resources Agency. It was established in terms of the National Heritage Resources Act number 25 in 1999. The South African Heritage Resource Agency is an agency of the Department of Sport, Arts and Culture in South Africa, and is the national administrative body that is responsible for the protection of South Africa's cultural heritage. So if you are asked at any stage what the responsibility of the South African Heritage Resources Agency is, they are responsible for the protection of South Africa's cultural heritage. If we then continue and look in particular at the functions of the South African Heritage Resources Agency, that agency is tasked to firstly identify sites and objects that are culturally significant to our nation. Let me just spend a bit of time unpacking that. If we look at the identification of sites, the identification of objects, and both the sites and the objects are important to our entire nation on a cultural level. So please be aware of that. They are important to our entire nation on a cultural level, and the South African Heritage Resources Agency is tasked then with identifying these sites and objects. But it doesn't stop there. After that, once they've identified them, they are required to conserve our national estate. Now you remember a couple of slides ago we looked at the term national estate. They are required to conserve, and to conserve something means to look after it and to protect it. And the national estate must be protected for future generations. So your children, your grandchildren also want to experience the different sites and objects that are part of our national estate, and that is why we need to conserve our national estate. The following function of the South African Heritage Resources Agency is to protect and maintain the physical status of our national estate. Now, I'd just like to unpack that statement quickly. If you look at protect and maintain the physical status. Now, when you're talking about physical status, you are speaking about maintaining the physical status of, for example, a building that forms part of the national estate. So the building must be maintained. In other words, it must be looked after so that it doesn't become dilapidated. If there is a window broken or a door broken in a particular building that is part of the national estate, it needs to be repaired. But we must also remember that any repairs to buildings that are part of the national estate must conform to the historical appearance of that building. So you cannot take a building that is part of the national estate and knock out a wall and put in an ultra-modern door in that particular place that you've taken the wall out. So it must all be kept in the building style of the era when the building was initially built. If you can have a look at the next bullet, to educate and promote our national estate with the objective of uniting our nation through heritage. And I'll come back to what I said a little bit earlier, the fact that although each of the cultural groupings in our country have various things that they regard as being part of their heritage, we have a collective heritage, and that collective heritage is definitely one aspect that can unite our nation. So SAHRA is therefore tasked with educating and promoting our national estate so that we can use it to unite our nation through our collective heritage. The final bullet on your screen at the moment is to compile and maintain an inventory of the national estate in the form of a database of information on heritage resources. If I unpack that quickly, compiling and maintaining an inventory. Now, an inventory is a list. So SAHRA is tasked with compiling a list of items that are on the national list of items on the national estate, but they must also not only compile that list, they must also keep that list updated on a regular basis. They need to also keep a database of information on heritage resources, which means they need to know how many heritage resources there are, when those heritage resources were declared as part of the national estate, and also what category of heritage resource that particular building or graveyard or shipwreck is. We are going to come back to that a little bit later, so let's just continue. We now come to provincial heritage bodies. I'm on the right-hand side of your screen now, the National Heritage Resources Act number 25 of 1999. Now, you will remember that that was the act that enabled the South African Heritage Resources Agency to be started. Now, that act follows the principle that heritage resources should be managed by the levels of government closest to the community. So if we take a look at that, your heritage resources should be maintained by the levels of government closest to the community. And let's unpack that a little bit. It's important that the heritage resources are maintained and managed by the people who are actually the closest to that particular site. So we must just remember that a site must be then managed, therefore, by the people who are in that particular area or in that particular province or region. Now, what you also need to know, grade 11, is that each province has their own provincial heritage body. And you will see on the left-hand side of your screen, we have each of the 9 provinces in South Africa and the names of each of the provincial heritage agencies in each province. So we go from the Eastern Cape, that has the Eastern Cape Provincial Heritage Resources Agency, down to the Western Cape, that has the Heritage Western Cape Agency. And you will see that the naming of each of those resource agencies doesn't follow a specific pattern. KwaZulu-Natal has Amafa Aqua Zulu-Natali, and you will see the Northern Cape also has Ngwau Boswa Kapa Bokoni. So there is no specific pattern to the naming of those heritage resource or the provincial heritage bodies. Now, if we continue taking a look at the provincial heritage bodies, you will see on your screen at the moment the functions of the provincial heritage agencies include identifying, recording, and managing heritage resources and objects within the province and providing annual reports on its activities. So that provincial heritage body, remember we've had a look at the function of the South African Heritage Resources Agency. We are now looking at each provincial heritage body. They are to identify, record, and manage heritage resources and objects within their province. They must also provide an annual report on the activities that take place within that specific heritage site or provincial heritage site within its province. Those provincial heritage agencies, each one in each of the provinces of South Africa, must also inform the South African Heritage Resources Agency whether there are heritage resources in the province that fulfill grade 1 status. Now, a heritage site or a heritage resource that fulfills grade 1 status is classified as a national heritage site. In other words, it has national heritage status. And that is a site that is regarded as so valuable for the heritage, the cultural heritage of the country, that it must be conserved for the entire nation. And those are sites that are called grade 1 heritage sites. If you then continue on that same slide, you will see that heritage resources with grade 2 status, and those are now provincial heritage sites, the ones that are so important for the entire province that they should be listed on as a heritage site. Those provincial heritage sites are then listed in the Provincial Heritage Register. And then provincial authorities must determine if local authorities can maintain heritage in their region. And there we come to another category of heritage site, and that is a grade 3 heritage site, which is known as a local heritage site. So you have 3 grades. A grade 1 heritage site is a national heritage site. A grade 2 heritage site is a provincial heritage site, and grade 3 is a local heritage site. Therefore, it is important for the people in that local community. Can I just please draw your attention to the image on the left-hand side of your screen? There you have the clock tower in the Cape Town harbour, which was built in 1882 and is definitely part of the national estate. If we then continue, we look at special heritage permits and protection regulations. The image that you see on your screen at the moment is that of the Castle of Good Hope, which is a National Heritage Site in Cape Town and dates back to 1679 and is regarded as the oldest building in South Africa. We now look at different buildings and structures and examples of the national estate. The first is structures that are older than 60 years. Now, structures, that is a building that is older than 60 years, are protected by law. Now, why? What is it that makes them so special that they are protected by law? They represent part of our past heritage in South Africa. Now, various structures fall into this category: old buildings, perhaps bridges or other forms of structures in the built environment. And these form an extremely important part of the history of developing our country. On your left-hand side of your screen, you will see that is the image of the Union Buildings in Pretoria, which is a National Heritage Site, and those buildings date back to 1913. If we then continue, you will see that the image on your screen at the moment is that of the Parliament Buildings in Cape Town, also a National Heritage Site, and dates back to the building of that National Heritage Site dates back to 1875 up until 1884. Again, we are still looking at structures that are older than 60 years. And the following bullet in this presentation reads as follows: once a site is declared a National Heritage Site, no person may destroy, damage, deface, excavate, alter, remove from its original position, or subdivide such a site without a permit issued by the relevant Provincial Heritage Resources Authority or the South African Heritage Resources Agency. And grade 11, you will see that particular statement coming up a number of times in the rest of this presentation. It doesn't matter if it is a grave, if it is a building, if it is a shipwreck. None of those may be destroyed, damaged, defaced, excavated, altered, in other words, changed or removed from its position or subdivided without a valid permit, and that valid permit needs to be issued by the Provincial Heritage Resources Authority of that particular province where the site is located, or must be issued by the South African Heritage Resources Agency. At the same time, the relevant Heritage Resources Authority, that would be the Provincial Heritage Resources Authority or the South African Heritage Resources Agency, must place a notice in the Government Gazette. Now, the Government Gazette is a document that comes out with official government announcements, and if the relevant Heritage Resources Authority places a notice about a particular heritage site in the Government Gazette, they must indicate what their plans are for the site, and then there is also an opportunity for the public to accept or reject those particular plans that are published in the Government Gazette. We then continue and we now look at some other items that are regarded as part of the national estate, and those are archaeological and paleontological sites and materials. I think as a starting point we need to make sure we understand what both of these terms are. Firstly, archaeology is the study of historic and prehistoric people, but specifically their tools, their rock art, their structures, and all the other traces that they have left behind. Now, an archaeologist will use various scientific methods to excavate the traces from the ground, and they are very careful when they carry out their excavations so that all the clues are recovered. They are also recorded, dated, and interpreted. If I can just go back to the term dated, that is to find out when that particular artifact was actually made or used, and that assists the archaeologist in interpreting that particular artifact. And in that way, archaeologists can reconstruct our human past. The second term that we have here is paleontology, the study of remains of plant and animal life that have been, as it were, turned to stone. These remains are called fossils, and these fossils are often bones of animals that died and were buried in mud or sand and thereafter fossilized. And another explanation for fossilized is being preserved in rock. So as part of the national estate, we have archaeological sites and materials as well as paleontological sites and materials. These archaeological and paleontological sites and materials, you will see the lovely image on your left-hand side where the archaeologists are actually busy with excavations on a particular site. You'll see how carefully they are working. They're taking great care not to do damage to anything that is excavated from the site. Individuals or communities that have a claim to archaeological or paleontological sites must register these sites in heritage registers. So any individual or community that have a claim on either of this type of site must register the site. Where do they register the site? In a heritage register. Nobody can make any changes to that particular site or the materials found in that site unless they have a valid permit from the South African Heritage Resources Agency. That permit must be issued before any development can take place. So if it were to happen that a community or an individual was to have a claim on a specific site, they would first have to inform the South African Heritage Resources Agency and apply for a permit, and only once that permit has been issued can any form of development take place in or around any of these sites. The next item that is listed as part of the national estate is meteorites. Now, a meteorite is a piece of rock, and that piece of rock has landed on the earth from outer space. And if you take a look at the right-hand side of your screen, you will see at the top picture, what you are seeing there is actually what is called a shooting star. And once a shooting star goes through the atmosphere, it heats up and it can be seen glowing as in that image. Once it has passed through the atmosphere and lands on the surface of the earth, it is called a meteorite. So it's a piece of rock from outer space. And those pieces of rock from outer space hold clues about how the Earth was formed, as well as other aspects of the geological history of the Earth and the entire Milky Way. If you take a look at the image of your screen, you will see that is a meteorite site that has formed, or what you are seeing there is actually a crater, which is a bowl-shaped depression or a hollowed-out area. That particular one is Morokweng, found in the northwest province of our country. Now, a meteorite is protected by law, and the fragments or the pieces of those meteorites cannot be picked up or removed by any member of the public, as they are considered part of the national estate. So any person that perhaps were to be lucky enough to see a meteorite landing somewhere in South Africa may not go and pick up a piece of that space rock or the space rock itself, because that is part of the national estate. Now, as you can see in the image, these objects from space can have a profound impact, in other words, a huge impact on the landscape, and they usually create a crater. And a crater, as I have already mentioned, is a bowl-shaped depression or a hollowed-out area. And arguably our most well-known crater in South Africa is the Vredefort Dome, which is actually also a World Heritage Site. And before any development can take place in an area where there is evidence of a meteorite having hit the Earth, anybody who wants to do a development or make any changes there, as I've said already on numerous occasions during this presentation, must obtain a valid permit from the South African Heritage Resources Agency, and may also only begin to make any developments or changes once that valid permit has been issued. Shipwrecks around the South African coast are also regarded as part of the national estate. The shipwreck is the remains of a ship that is destroyed at sea. Now, a shipwreck could be underwater, as you see on the left-hand side of your screen. That particular shipwreck is still underwater, or it could also be on the beach or lying on the coastline, as that shipwreck in the middle is doing. Now, approximately 3,000 historical shipwrecks are located around our coast in South Africa. Each of these shipwrecks come from a different nationality, and we are certainly not regarded as the Cape of Storms in the Western Cape for no reason, because a lot of these shipwrecks are located around the Western Cape area that is known as the Cape of Storms. Shipwrecks are a unique archaeological resource, so very valuable for people who want to study them, and can provide a wealth of historical information. If somebody that has a valid permit and is taking a look at a shipwreck as an archaeological resource, they can find information about the navigation instruments used at the time when the ship was sailing. They can find information about the crockery, perhaps tools that were used on board the ship, and also medicines that were used aboard the ship by the people of that time. On the right-hand side of your screen, you will see that particular shipwreck is the Arniston. Now, the Arniston ran aground near Cape Agulhas in the Western Cape way back in 1815. Another example of a shipwreck in the Western Cape is the Birkenhead, which is located near Gansbaai in the Western Cape, and the Birkenhead went down in 1852. And all of these shipwrecks give a lot of information about various aspects of historical interest once they are investigated and once the artifacts are removed, if the developer or the person removing them has the relevant certificate or permit. If we continue with shipwrecks, we will see shipwrecks and material from wrecks that are older than 60 years are protected by the National Heritage Resources Act and are the property of the state. So those shipwrecks that you see there belong to the state. Those people that are diving on the left-hand side and the center image, those shipwrecks, would presumably be people that have the relevant permit from the Heritage Agency or the Heritage Resource Agency, as they may not be disturbed unless a permit has been issued. A permit is not required to visit most shipwrecks, provided that they are not disturbed or interfered with and that no artifacts are removed or damaged. So perhaps if those people are just diving and swimming around those particular shipwrecks, they will not be in trouble. But if they remove an artifact, now an artifact is an object made by a human being that is of cultural or historical interest. So if any of those divers were to remove one of those artifacts, then they would need the relevant permit. If we then continue and look at more items that are regarded as part of the national estate, or sites that are regarded as part of the national estate, we're specifically looking at burial grounds and graves. These sites are physical and symbolic reminders of our historical past in South Africa. The South African Heritage Resources Agency is responsible for identifying these sites, also preserving them, and protecting the burial grounds and graves that are of historical and cultural significance. Some examples that you could have of this type of site is the graves of soldiers and civilians who died inside or outside of South Africa during the wars, for example, perhaps World War I or World War II, or even the Anglo-Boer War. Another example would be the graves of freedom fighters who died because of political struggle that took place in the country, or perhaps graves of individuals who provided outstanding service to their communities, perhaps those of kings and political leaders. We also have burial grounds and graves that are regarded as part of the national estate. And it's important to note that before anybody can exhume the bodies in those graves, now exhume the bodies means dig out the bodies, they must obtain a permit from the South African Heritage Resources Agency, and that permit is only issued once the family members of the people who were buried in those burial grounds or graves have been consulted and those families have given permission. Why would one want to exhume or dig out a body? Perhaps a site needs to be developed, or the site would have to be maintained, and that would require exhuming the bodies, and in that case the relevant permission must be obtained. Okay, grade 11, as has become the practice in these virtual lessons, we do an activity once we've come to the end of our lesson. This particular activity is extracted from the November 19 Eastern Cape Provincial question paper, in particular question 5. The instruction is to study the information and answer the questions. Let's read it together. The Boerkaap, formerly known as the Malay Quarter, has been the traditional home of Cape Town's Muslim population. Much of the Cape Town Muslim community draws its roots from slaves brought in from Indonesia and other eastern countries. When slavery was abolished in the 1830s, many of these slaves settled in the Boer Kaap. Just let me pause here for a second and take you back to the very first slide in this presentation, where you had the two images in front of you. The left-hand side one was very brightly colored houses, and I told you then that those were located in the Boer Kaap in the Western Cape. Now, if we continue reading, you will see the notice says that notification of the intention to declare a number of sites within the Boer Kaap, Cape Town, as National Heritage Sites in terms of Section 27 of the National Heritage Resources Act number 25 of 1999. So that would be a notification that would appear in a document such as the Government Gazette. The Boer Kaap Museum is one of 20 Boer Kaap sites to be declared a National Heritage Site. Built in the 1760s, the Boer Kaap Museum is the oldest house in the area, still in its original form. And there you have below that an image of the Boer Kaap Museum, which was built in the 1760s in Cape Town. Let's take a look at the questions that come up here. The first one is referred to the notification above, and A, identify the legal body that issued the notification, and B, explain how the notification is linked to one of the functions of the legal body identified in question 5.2.1a. So we're going to start with A here, and I certainly hope that you know what the answer is to that question. Identify the legal body that issued the notification, and that would be the South African Heritage Resources Agency, known as SAHRA. They would have issued that notification. And the question B, explain how the notification is linked to one of the functions of the legal body identified. So if we go back to one of the slides early in the presentation, it referred to the functions of SAHRA. And you should be able to identify one of the functions that is evident in the extract given to you. Let's take a look at the answers. There you have the answer to A, South African Heritage Resources Agency, and the correct answer to B, SAHRA is tasked with the protection of South Africa's cultural heritage, and therefore the notification is proof that it is carrying out its function. Grade 11, here you have an excellent example of application of your knowledge on heritage bodies, because earlier in the presentation, as I said, we're taking a look at the functions of the South African Heritage Resources Agency. And one of those functions is the protection of cultural heritage. You are then required to link your knowledge of that function with the extract given on the left-hand side of your screen, and then to make the deduction that that notification is proof that the South African Heritage Resources Agency is carrying out its function of protecting the cultural heritage of South Africa. The next question on your screen at the moment: after the 20 Boer Kaap sites are declared National Heritage Sites, strict conditions will apply in order to protect them. Motivate this statement. And I've probably given you the answer to this question already about 8 or 9 times in this presentation, where I referred to the fact that no changes to any of these sites that are regarded as part of the national estate, no alterations, no changes may be done or effected or carried out without the relevant permit from either the Provincial Heritage Resources Agency or the South African Heritage Resources Agency. So therefore, let's take a look at the answer on your screen at the moment. Firstly, the sites will be protected under the National Heritage Resources Act, and that has also come up on numerous occasions during this presentation. And secondly, a permit will have to be obtained from the South African Heritage Resources Agency in order to make any changes to the site. Our final question in this presentation: give one reason why the buildings in the Bo-Kaap should become part of the national estate. In other words, what are we asking here? Why is it so important that these buildings in particular should be part of the national estate in South Africa? So what makes them so important? And the answers here are on your screen at the moment. Firstly, to ensure that the sites are preserved for future generations, and we had that again earlier on in the presentation when we spoke about the functions of the South African Heritage Resources Agency. Another answer that is given there is the protection of these sites will contribute to a greater understanding of the history, traditions and culture of Cape Town's Muslim community, as well as the presentation of the sites will provide opportunities for research into the history, traditions and culture of Cape Town's Muslim community. Now again, if I can just refer you to the application of your knowledge, as I mentioned with the second question on this slide, where you are required to have a certain amount of knowledge about this topic, but you're also required to be able to apply your knowledge. So in understanding and indicating that the protection and preservation of the sites adds great value for research and understanding into the history, traditions and culture of the Muslim community in Cape Town, you are then showing that you are able to apply the knowledge that you have gained in this section of the work. Right, that brings us to the end of today's lesson, grade 11. I trust that you enjoyed it. I trust that you found it insightful, that you've learned something, and I wish you well for the rest of your school year. Goodbye.